Let's open a word of prayer. Lord, thank you for this day, Lord, and we just pray that you will give us wisdom as we live in a very difficult time, Lord. We pray that you will bring peace to the Middle East, that you will protect those who are acting justly, and that you will give every wisdom in how to conduct themselves and act in this time. Bless us this day in Jesus' name, amen. Well, it does seem that things are unraveling. It's been, for me, it's been a rather difficult week. I have friends in Israel. I've been in communication with a lot of people, back and forth, trying to figure out what happened. We're now a little over a week past this, and I will say that nothing is closer to being resolved today than it was 10 days ago. I tried to prepare everything that I was going to present to you today, and I failed, just because there was a lot of information to sift through, a lot of videos, a lot of thoughts, a lot of people communicating things with me. And I try not to ignore people, but I get sent, it seems like 100 or 200 videos a day, some of which are an hour and a half long. And I just don't have that much time to go through them. So if you want to send me videos, I would ask, and I see some people starting to do this, if you want to do that, that's fine. There's different ways to communicate with me. My church email is on the church website at fbchapel.com. A lot of you have my email. I'm on Facebook Messenger, Twitter. I have a Telegram channel. I don't know if people can comment on there or not. I haven't bothered to check because I don't comment on my own stuff. But there's many ways to communicate with me. But if you would, please send me a summary of a couple bullet points in the movie and maybe even a timestamp. If you go to a YouTube video and you find something that's interesting and you're looking at it, go down and click on the share button, and then there's a little box to check. Click the timestamp, copy that link, and that's what you send. So that I don't have to sift through an hour and a half of videos that, frankly, at this point in time, I apologize, but I just don't have time to do it. It's there is a lot of things going on. Just to remind you of our little grid that I've developed. I've seen a lot of things this week that have bothered me a lot. Olivier Melnick and I did a little program Friday. It's up on our YouTube channel. I was on One American News. Also had a two-part interview with David Fiorazo. One part played Friday on Worldview Matters. You can look for that on Apple Podcast and Rumble and some other channels. I don't know what all they're on. And then part two will play tomorrow sometime. I don't know what time. It'll be up and posted tomorrow. So I talked to a lot of people this week. I have a tremendous number of thoughts running through my head at this time, more than usual. But I've seen some things that concern me, but I've seen some things that encourage me. Those of us who speak on this topic in conferences, it should be pretty obvious if you pay attention to the different conferences that people don't agree on everything. Even people at the same conference with a lot of the same orientation don't agree on some of the finer details. And I think that's okay that we're in this period of time where things are going to be happening more quickly. So I'm not as bothered by people disagreeing. I'm bothered by people who mock the whole observation of what's going on in the world. I saw a post today, oh, you people, this has always been the same thing. It's the same thing that's been going on since Jesus went back to heaven. This is no different than any other time. Now, I don't know how you can say that, and I think that if you want to have that opinion, that's fine, and then don't pay attention to any of us who are talking about it. How about that? because I don't know what edifying thing you thought would happen. The events of Bible prophecy that are prophesied in Scripture will unfold in a real world. They will happen, as I've said, I think I titled my talk in Texas at the Hope for Our Times conference about 6 weeks ago, 5 or 6 weeks ago. Seems like 8 months ago at this point. Gradually, then suddenly. And I've talked about that a lot, that things in Bible prophecy will happen gradually and they will happen suddenly. It's just like things that we see with regard to the apostasy in the church. It will be gradual, then sudden. I see a lot of things, frankly, and this is not to tout my own horn, I see a lot of things happening in the church that I talked about at least 22 years ago. They're now really coming to the forefront. Back then, we used to talk about postmodernism, and then shortly after that, it sort of morphed into postmodernism being that thought where your truth, everybody has their own truth, and your truth is as good as my truth. But you can see that in the current context of the world, these jihadis have their truth, and it's diametrically opposed to the truth that other people hold. So the postmodernism morphed into in the church, into the emergent or emerging church. I think it was, people tried to make a distinction between the two, and it was, I found to be nonsensical. That also started to bring in a lot of mysticism and that type of thing into the church. And it's only gotten worse. It's been mainstream. I mean, we don't even talk about the emergent and the emerging church anymore because it's embedded in the evangelical church. And I use the term church pretty loosely with what I'm seeing going on these days. But with the events that we see going on in the Middle East, with this nation called Israel, with Bible prophecy, whatever we thought was divisive in the church and dividing the church, my belief and strong conviction is you've seen nothing yet. This will become one of the most, if not the most divisive thing we have ever seen in the days, weeks, months, and years. And I'm not inclined to add decades to that lineage of dates or time markers, because it's going very quickly. And we know that in Daniel chapter 12, it talks about, a time when the wise will understand. Now, if you're mocking or unconcerned about the times in which we live, then you are not going to be one of the wise that understand. You have completely excluded yourself from that possibility. Much like the people who did not look at the time markers associated with the first coming of Christ in terms of the prophecies that existed, they missed it. Missing it this time will carry with it severe consequences. Let's look at some of the things that happen now. We've had this talk, by the way, while I'm talking on this will be focused solely on what's going on in Israel and the Middle East for the most part, but it's having a worldwide impact. There are a lot of things, believe me, if you saw the pile of things in notes and maybe I should just publish my messages to myself, because that's where I send all my links, and then I never get to them. And I have a large number of links concerning what's going on with the economy, central bank digital currencies, economic crisis, energy issues. I might have a couple slides about that today. I don't remember because I now remember I put a couple in, but I don't know if they are still there. But we're in a big problem in the world if you haven't noticed. Food prices continue to go up. Energy costs continue to go up. It's a difficult time to live. So this is the flag of Hamas. This is the organization in Gaza that has been in power in Gaza since about 2007. Israel withdrew from Gaza in 2005. Actually, I believe the day that they began pulling Jewish residents of Gaza out of Gaza was the 9th of Av, which is a historically significant date on the Jewish calendar and in Jewish history. The first and second temples were destroyed on that day. And people who had farms, homes, businesses, they were pulled out of Israel. It's interesting that within about 48 hours, a little hurricane hit the United States called Katrina. Had a conversation with an Orthodox Jew in Ben Gurion Airport in 2011, and we talked about that, and he said, you Christians need to understand that when you make us divide our land, things happen to you. Now everybody's doing it. Now everybody wants to do it. So there's this organization that came to power in Gaza in 2007. It was democratically elected. I don't know if they've had elections since. The question is how popular they are. They rule with a rod of iron. They are an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood. They are funded largely by Qatar, which is a country that funds the Muslim Brotherhood, that has propaganda channels like Al Jazeera. And by the way, while I'm mentioning propaganda, you need to be very careful right now because you are going to see propaganda about this particular situation in the Middle East and other things like you've never seen before. It's really going to be off the charts. So you need to be very discerning about what you see. I see so-called Christians posting some of the most anti-Semitic hatred that I can imagine. And various channels. I guess if you want to email me, I'll send you some of the names. I don't want to go into them right now. I don't want to give them any credit for anything. It should be patently obvious to you. If the knee-jerk reaction is to blame Israel for everything that went on, that's an anti-Semitic channel. And I see people doing it, frankly, I'm shocked. I'm sickened. And if people are doing it, you ought to ignore them. That does not mean, by the way, that everything that Israel does is perfect. I will mention some of those things today when I get to it. Here's the Hamas logo. They have no interest in making peace with Israel. Their charter contains statements. It was updated. It was published in, I think, about 2004, then updated in 2016 or 2017. And that charter is clearly calling for the eradication of Israel. Now, sometimes people, when they do this, they say they're nice about it. They run around chanting these slogans at universities and protest in our country. Tens of thousands of people From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Well, the only way that that can happen is there's no Israel. And if there's no Israel, I think, as I heard Caroline Glick say this week, Zionism exists to protect Jews. And to a large point, I agree about that. It's a troubling time. This is the man who is the head of Hamas, Haniyeh. He lives in Qatar in a luxurious apartment. And you can see from the grooming of his beard that he probably visits an expensive barber every day of his life. Process that. So here is a little video that I found, and it was done by a pro-Hamas person, but I thought it was pretty good to show what happened last Saturday. We're sort of just kind of grasping all of these things, and it's really, what happened was a stunning invasion of Israel. It's really rocked a lot of people, and it's rocked everybody in Israel. Talked to a friend, he said it's almost like everybody in Israel right now, to some degree, has post-traumatic stress disorder. People aren't able to work, they can't concentrate, they're scared, and with good reason. So last Saturday morning, about 6:30 a.m., a little bit dispute on the time. There's some timestamps that indicate that the first terrorists may have arrived at some of these communities about 6 a.m. The rockets started flying at 6:30, and at the time, I haven't compared all the statistics, but I believe it was been the most rapid barrage of rockets in Israel's history. Now, there were reasons for that, and people were saying, well, why did Iron Dome fail? Why did Iron Dome fail? I don't know that Iron Dome failed. The fear has always been, as I've reviewed multiple intelligence reports concerning the great fear of war in the north and the rockets that are in the possession of Hezbollah and other Iranian proxies, including, by the way, some Hamas groups in Lebanon, and then Hezbollah in Syria and mainly in Lebanon, where they can effectively control the government, and then in Syria, and other Syrian groups, Iranian proxies, have, by some estimates, 250,000 rockets. What you saw last weekend was a barrage of rockets that quickly went over 3,000 rockets in a very short period of time, about 6 or 7 hours, which I think is a significant time marker. So as these terrorists were coming to the fence, this is Gaza in southwestern Israel. It's about 7.5 miles wide at its widest point, about 3 miles wide in the north and in the middle. And so here you see, as these are the casualties that are going, and you can see the invasion, you can see the timestamp in the upper right-hand corner. So now we're about 10 hours into this. You can see how far some people went in the invasion, and they went back. And so over the next 2.5 days, the body count kept rising. Now, the casualties here, at least in this video when it was made, are dead and injured. The number, though, right now, dead exceed 1,300 in Israel, and probably 1,300 in Gaza, if we can believe the statistics that Hamas is putting out. And the casualties in Israel are somewhere approaching 4,000 injured. They came in, it was a lightning attack. I'll show you a video that the Israel guys put up. It was a stunning achievement. And people in Israel don't understand how it happened. Some have suggested that people in the government planned it or allowed it to happen. I don't know. We're at that point. They're at war right now, and I think there's appropriate time for that to be determined. This will have tremendous political fallout. I don't know what's going to happen, but I can guess that if it repeats what happened 50 years, roughly 50 years to the day before, 50 years to the day of what happened last week on Saturday, was the Yom Kippur War in 1973. Golda Meir was able to, with some of her generals, particularly Ariel Sharon, was able to turn things around, got some assistance from the United States government under Richard Nixon. I think historically Henry Kissinger was not pleased with Nixon stepping in. There's some indication historically that Kissinger might have worked with Moshe Dayan, the famous general in Israel, to allow Egypt to have a little bit of a victory and maybe take out 100 or 200 Israeli soldiers, but it turned into 2,500 soldiers. And it does show you that people will do things. And the reason that Kissinger did this was because he said, well, if Egypt perceives itself as a bit stronger, it will help stabilize things in the Middle East. And how has that enterprise gone? And 50 years now, Henry Kissinger is still alive. He's 100 years old now. And I have not heard him apologize for anything that he has ever done. Although he did issue a statement this week saying, maybe Europe's let too many people cross the borders. Oh, well, thanks, Henry. I think you were for that all the way along. The man is not to be trusted. So 1,300 dead. Israel responded. They've bombed the north part of the Gaza Strip. This is a mosque that was attacked. And why did they attack a mosque? Because it's where Hamas has headquarters and militants and where they fire rockets from. They see where the rockets are coming from. They do try to warn people, and then they take the building down. There is a rather large hospital in the northern part of the Gaza Strip that has thousands of patients. And there's pretty good authority, pretty good evidence that Hamas has its headquarters underneath that building for a reason. But people are looking, I see this is an editorial cartoon from the Times of London, the state of insecurity. And it's interesting, 3 weeks ago Friday, I played you the clip a couple weeks ago. You can go back and look at it. 3 weeks ago today, Benjamin Netanyahu went to the United Nations. Raisi went to the United Nations. Biden went to the United Nations. Netanyahu met with Joe Biden in New York City. And I think he got an invitation to come to the White House later this year. It's kind of a non-specific thing by Joe Biden. And Joe Biden said he would support Israel. But it was very interesting what Netanyahu said in his speech. If you remember the speech, I'm not going to play it. I could play it, but he said, in the book of Deuteronomy, Moses gathered the children of Israel before his death and told them about the blessings and the curses. Blessings if they followed what the Lord said, curses if they did not. He said, now we have curses in the world from Iran, but we're in the midst of a blessing because we're close to a peace agreement with Saudi Arabia. And I'll paraphrase what Prime Minister Netanyahu said, that will change the face of the Middle East. And while he was optimistic, and there were many indications that this was, if not already inked, close to being inked, maybe not announced until after King Salman dies in Saudi Arabia. That's my own personal take on it. And by the way, I could be 100% wrong on that. But his prediction of changing the face of the Middle East came true, but for a totally different reason. The face of the Middle East did change. It appears that this operation had been planned by Hamas with the assistance of Iran and Hezbollah for maybe 2 years. It at least started over a year ago when Netanyahu was not even the prime minister, when no one in Israel had suggested judicial reform or anything of that sort, before anybody had been appointed that wanted to strengthen settlements and that sort of thing. There was a conspiracy and a conniving against Israel by Hamas with the assistance of Iran. And I think that's coming to the fore. I'll talk more about this later. But it was a stunning operation. Now, I'm going to play a little clip, short clip from a YouTube channel. I believe that in the show notes, it'll have a link to it. It's from the Israel guys. And it's very well done. It talks a little bit about the initial stages. I'm not going to go all the way through the bloody nature of some of the things that are in that video. They got flagged on YouTube, and I got flagged on YouTube. When I did my interview with One American News, I'd given them a couple video clips, and they played them in the background, and the video got flagged as inappropriate. And that's okay. They, or at least are not taking it down, and I don't mind that they put the thing on. So here's just a few minutes of the Israel guys.
Guys, as you know, Israel was attacked by the terrorist organization Hamas this week. We're talking about the largest mass murder of Jewish civilians since the Holocaust, with awful brutality involved. And a question that's on a lot of people's minds is, how on earth did this take place? How on earth was Israel caught off guard? We're still in the fog of war, so there's a lot of things that are not known even as of yet. But our team has been working all week to try to piece together an accurate account of how things went down. Let's go through this right now. October 7th, 2023. Israelis were celebrating the last day of the joyous festival of Sukkot, Simchat Torah. It was a Sabbath in Israel, so religious Jews had all electronics turned off, including phones, radios, and TVs. At 6:30 a.m., Hamas began firing a barrage of nearly 3,000 rockets into southern Israel. Israelis ran for bomb shelters as the Iron Dome worked overtime to defend against the attack. As terrible as the rockets were, Israel had faced this many times before. In a way, it almost seemed routine.
The sound.
Shortly afterwards, Hamas sent a number of terrorists over the Gaza border fence in motorized glider planes, somehow evading detection by Israeli radar. These terrorists landed, then secured the ground around parts of the border fence. Once in position, hundreds of terrorists from the Gaza side blew a hole in the fence near the Kerem Shalom crossing, possibly using pre-planted explosives. Commando unit quickly made their way through the fence and attacked Israel's Southern Army Gaza headquarters, somehow jamming their communications, preventing personnel from calling commanders or each other. Not long after, another unit of terrorists attacked and subdued the IDF's Erez border crossing further north.
Allahu Akbar!
Okay, if you want to see that whole video, you can go over to this link. So it was a stunning achievement. They came across the border. They took out communications towers. They took out people in the guard towers. It was a Shabbat. It was similar to what happened in Yom Kippur. This was Simchat Torah. It was a holiday, a feast, a Shabbat, a special day. It appears a lot of people were off. As best as I can determine, there had been a terrorist attack a little bit further north and a lot of unrest in the West Bank. And so people assumed that the border was secure with the people that they had. So they shifted some resources to the north. And there were a lot of, appears to be, errors made. They were deceived. It was a very clever operation. They jammed communications. They took out communications facilities. They took out guards. They went into barracks and bases and killed soldiers. There were about 300 soldiers killed. In many cases, they were shot as they were waking up from sleep, running in their underwear to get their weapons, shot and killed, and then they took their uniforms and put their uniforms on in many cases, and then they went into the communities around the border fence, about 20 communities, and they would go to the door dressed as, in some cases, Israeli soldiers saying, "We're here to help," and they would go in and they would kill the people. The brutality of what was done was just absolutely stunning. I do not have a clip of the I-24 news report, but if you go to YouTube to I-24 News, small I-24 News, you will find a report. I cannot remember the reporter's name. The Israeli Defense Forces took foreign press on a tour of the kibbutzes as they were recovering bodies after they had determined that the bodies of the terrorists, which were rotting in the sun, it was a sickening sight. They took them around and they showed them what they had done. In one kibbutz near the north part of the Gaza Strip, they found 40 bodies of toddlers and babies, a number of whom had been decapitated. In many cases, they took the bodies and they burned them beyond recognition. It was bad enough that even the official account, Twitter account of the Prime Minister of Israel posted several pictures, one of a dead baby and then of two burned bodies. Things that I'm not even sure that ISIS did. It was cruel, it was horrific, and they were targeting Jews. There was a rave party that was going on down near the border involving 1,000 or so young people, mainly young people, about 2 to 3 miles from the north part of the border of the Gaza Strip in an open field. I'll show you a couple pictures of that soon. It may have been the first place where they attacked people. They came in. I'll talk more about that later. The United States has come out in support of Israel and has said, listen, we're going to put these assets, the Gerald Ford Carrier Group is in the Eastern Mediterranean now with aircraft and support vessels. It's the largest aircraft carrier that we have. There's some question in people in Israel, is it really here to help? Is it here to help great? Or is it just here to kind of keep us from going too far? There was, as you know, there was money that Iran had frozen in South Korea accounts by sanctions issued by the United States. Those sanctions were lifted. The money was transferred to Qatar. It was soon to be taken by Iran to use. It had not been used in this operation, as best as I can tell. And there was, this is the Washington Post a couple days ago, reporting that the U.S. and Qatar had entered into a quiet agreement to stop this $6 billion from getting to Iran. However, there's clear evidence that tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars have been transferred in the recent months to the Palestinian Authority and to Hamas. The Palestinian Authority took 5 days before they came out, and they said, we abhor the loss of life on both sides. They did not condemn Hamas. There's a lot of tension between Hamas and the Palestinian Authority. They don't get along. There's a lot of tension within the area of the West Bank known as Biblical Judea and Biblical Samaria. It's a very, very big mess. Iran has been very clever in the way they've gone after this. They have been funding terror cells in the West Bank area. That would be the areas immediately south and north of Jerusalem, all the way up to Nazareth. You know, there's been reporting on this for months. There have been operation after operation, Jenin, Nablus, other places. There have been people killed driving on highways, Jewish people killed driving on highways. There have been a lot of Palestinians killed in Israeli Defense Force raids as they take out these terror cells. And so that's caused, I believe, a shift in resources to that area away from the border fence, which they felt was secure. Now, look, if they thought that border was secure, they were wrong. It was overwhelmed. I think it was a masterfully designed operation. It used high tech, but it also used low tech. Ultralights, paragliders came in with people on them. I don't know how many. I've heard maybe 100. Pickup trucks, motorcycles, scooters, Jeeps, and then they used drones that dropped explosives, as that video noted. And they caught everybody off guard. Now, so people are saying it was intentional. I'm not convinced of that yet, because I think I want to give credit to the enemy. You know, in Psalm 83, it talks about enemies in the near vicinity of Israel will be conniving and conspiring against them, so that the name of Israel will be remembered no more. And whether Hamas is specifically mentioned in that or referenced in that prophecy, this written by Asaph, who's described in another passage in Scripture and Chronicles, like 2 Chronicles, I think, as a seer, as a prophet. He wrote this, and so some people say, well, it's just a prayer, it's just a description. I think it's an indicator of a permanent condition at a minimum. And they get together and they craft and take counsel with each other so that the name of Israel will be remembered no more. And we see that that's what's happened. So let's just look at some of the headlines. Death toll over 1,300. Blinken went and said that we are totally behind Israel. He's been in the Middle East. He's been traveling around. Yesterday, he went to the Abrahamic House of Faith in the United Arab Emirates with a representative of the United Arab Emirates government. And he noted in his speech that he has family, I don't know if his parents or grandparents, might have been his parents, Holocaust survivors from Europe. He's Jewish. Biden came out in support of the United States in an encouraging way, but the one thing that was kind of missing from all of the talk was Iran. Nobody really wanted to talk about Iran. We know that there have been these people that are involved in this government and were involved in the Obama administration that are very pro-Iranian. And one of them is an assistant to an assistant secretary of defense at the Pentagon right now. That was exposed by the Atlantic, Iran International, another website called Semaphore, S-E-M as in Mary, A-F-O-R-E, Semaphore. So it was encouraging and not encouraging. The funerals are starting. The stories, well, there are 1,300 dead Israelis. The big concern, about 29 of them were Americans. There are about, by most estimates, about at least, assuming they're alive, 150 hostages were taken back to Iran. There are pictures as you see the hostages go. There's a picture, a video of a girl, I understand she was shot and killed later. She was taken out of the back of a vehicle. I don't know if it's a Jeep or a personnel carrier. And as she got out, the area between her legs and her rear end was dirty. And I thought, oh, she soiled her pants because she was so scared. No, she was brutally raped. And that's what was done with a lot of the women in the settlements. They were raped. And at least one terrorist has been captured. There's a video of him being interrogated. He says, yeah, we raped them. We beheaded people. And so what you're going to see, though, is you're going to see all this propaganda. When you say that, oh, show me the pictures. Because people won't believe what's right in front of them. This is propaganda operation like you've never seen. There's Blinken. Here's a New York Times article on the front page today. Hamas exploited secrets of the Israel's military. And I think it's, by the way, I think it's a very well done article. It's been picked up by other publications in Germany and elsewhere. I personally believe that when this thing is investigated fully, it was like they knew where everybody was. And so they timed the operation. They had done drills near the border fence on a number of occasions. There's some indicators that Egypt had given warnings. I don't know how specific they were, that Egypt had given warnings to the Israeli government about what was coming. Netanyahu has denied receiving those warnings. So look, there's going to be an investigation. Golda Meir was out of office, by the way, even though she, under her guidance, Israel won the 1973 Yom Kippur War and actually took tripled the size of the country by taking over the complete Sinai. They stopped Ariel Sharon. He was ready to go all the way to Cairo and take it over in a stunning victory, turnaround. But within 6 months, she's out of office, and I suspect that Prime Minister Netanyahu is going to have the same fate. There's tremendous anger against him and the government on all sides of the political issue. They formed an emergency coalition government with Danny Gantz, who gave a pretty good speech the other day, said, this is not about, we're not going to worry about the other relatively, I don't know if he said this, I'm paraphrasing, not so important stuff. We have a war to win, and we're going to unite to do that. So that's encouraging. Other people have joined the emergency coalition government, but things are in a very big state of turmoil in the Israeli government. I think that all these rocket attacks, so a year ago, what happened, a little over a year ago, Palestinian Islamic Jihad did a rocket barrage on Israel. That lasted about 10 or 11 days, and in that period of time, about 3,000 rockets were launched into Israel, and that was a lot. This had about 3,000 or more rockets in the first 6 or 7 hours. Part of that was done, I believe, to gather intelligence for what they want to do in the north, which is overwhelm Iron Dome and David's Sling. Hamas did shoot off one rocket that went all the way to Haifa, which is 100 miles. It was taken out by David's Sling, which is designed more for longer range missiles because they fly at a higher altitude. Iron Dome has an altitude limitation. But part of it was, and people were saying, well, why is Iron Dome failing? And I'm not convinced that it failed. It's just that it was overwhelmed. But this is over the last 3-4 years, I have read many intelligence reports all concerned about what's going to happen, what is going to happen if there's a war in the north, how many casualties are we going to incur before we can get things under control, because Iron Dome will not be able to handle the rockets or the drones. Now, there's a development of a thing, I've reported about this for at least a year, called Iron Beam. Some people have indicated that it's close to being operational, which is why they may have decided to do the operation at this time, the invasion from Gaza. I don't know that it is, but even then, it's cheaper, but it has limited range. So where Iron Dome can be miles away from the missile, Iron Beam needs to be 1 kilometer to a mile away from the projectile that it's trying to shoot down, whether it's a drone or a missile. And it'll be amazing. I mean, and I think it's coming, but it's not here yet. That's for sure. You can see the picture there on the right upper left-hand corner, body bags stacked up. I saw truckloads of burned bodies. I saw truckloads, semi-trailer truckloads of refrigerated trucks, body bags. I saw body bags that were like this big. In some cases, those body bags might have contained the remains of an adult who had been burned. It's the level of cruelty was there. They set things on fire. They roamed through these communities down there. When I was there in December, they took us down with the media summit. They took us down to Niram, which is probably the closest kibbutz to the border fence near the south part. Maybe a mile from the border fence. I think if you go to the edge of the kibbutz where they have a fence, of course, and they have security gates and all this, they said that the border fence is about 1 kilometer away, I think is what they said. And it's heavily agriculture. It's flat. You can see forever. They spent $1 billion on this fence, but it was overwhelmed. People can't understand how that could happen. Israel has the best security in the world, but not everything works. Not everything is an Entebbe raid. You remember the raid where Benjamin Netanyahu's brother led a raid to free hostages at Entebbe Airport in Uganda back on July 4th, 1976, by the way, a very significant date in American history, the 200th anniversary. Israel was flying, 8-10 hours down to Entebbe, refueling the planes, taking out the terrorists and getting almost all the hostages out. I think a couple of them were killed, or one of them had been taken to hospital and she was never seen again. And that operation was led on the ground by Yoni Netanyahu, Prime Minister Netanyahu's older brother, and he was the only Israeli killed in that raid. If you want to watch a good documentary about it, there's a documentary out there. I have a copy of it myself called Follow Me, about that raid. So just, they're going into Gaza. Right now, there's some question as to when they're going to do that. Everybody expected them to start it. I think what you'll find is they'll start it when they're good and ready to. When the weather conditions are good, when they have everybody there. Israel has called up 350,000 reserves out of a country of 9 million people. This means that there's nobody in Israel that does not know anybody that's not affected, certainly within 1 or 2 degrees. I mean, family, friends, 1,300 dead Israelis down in a relatively small area of the country. There was a stabbing in France of a Jewish person. I believe I even saw outside the embassy Israeli embassy in China, a Jewish man was stabbed just today. There's also some thinking that maybe China was involved in this because China has designs on Taiwan, and this will get the world focused on one thing. And by the way, how many of you read any articles about Ukraine this week? That's still going on. May have seen a couple, but not that many. Netanyahu says we're going to go until Hamas is no more. It will be a very difficult operation. Here's a graphic that was from one of the kibbutzes. In the upper left-hand corner, you see a couple. They have 14-month-old twins. They left the twins in the safe room in their residence and went out to fight the terrorists and were killed. 16 hours later, and it took time. These communities are spread out. It took soldiers a while to get there. I don't know why. That's going to be investigated. But then they went to the safe room about 16 hours later and found the twins there alive. And so now here's two twins that have no parents. And there are many stories of that. There were whole families slaughtered, father, mother, 3 daughters. There was one particularly cruel story where the terrorists went into the home of an elderly lady, a grandmother, referred to by everybody as the matriarch of her family. Everybody loved grandma. They used her phone to film them killing her. They then used her phone to upload a video of her being killed to the grandmother's Facebook account, where her granddaughter happened to log on to Facebook and find it. They were taking grandmothers, babies, children. I posted a picture on my Facebook page of a 3 or 4-year-old young girl, cute, real curly hair. I have great nieces around that age with curly hair, and they took her to Gaza, where she is a hostage, where they will use her as a human shield. This is a level of cruelty. You can see pictures of inside the kibbutz and that sort of thing. Now, a lot of people in Israel are coming out. Here's an ex-Mossad chief that says, "Oh, well, a ground invasion will only add to the agony." And so there's a reason why it's sometimes good that people are ex-Mossad chiefs when they're this stupid. There were documents revealed. There was an NBC report on Lester Holt's Nightly News and elsewhere on MSNBC that the documents show that they were going to target children. They had very detailed maps of the area. They knew where they were going specifically. They executed that in many, many cases. There's one story, though, of a lady who, there are a couple places where they didn't have success. Most of the weapons are kept in an armory in a kibbutz, so you have to get access to them, and this came so quickly. And I think that all these rocket attacks that they've had over the years, they were gathering intel. What do people do when we launch a rocket attack? The sirens go off and they run to their safe room. What do the soldiers do when we do that? And I don't know what the rule is for soldiers. I've asked people, I haven't gotten an answer yet. What do they stand down? And these rocket attacks went on for 6 hours. And there was some indication that people said, we're under fire, we can't come right now. I don't know the answer. Saudi Arabia has come out and they've put the Israel deal on ice, and they've started talking to Tehran. Here's another editorial from the Times of London. You can see who struck the match there. That's the Ayatollah Khamenei. Here on the right, tens of thousands of people have come out. Campuses and elsewhere. I think this is London, a protest in favor of Hamas in London. By the way, the protests started in the United States, in London, in Paris, on university campuses. Hundreds, tens of thousands of students and others coming out in support of Hamas before Israel really started bombing the Gaza Strip. Now, what does that tell you about the morality of our culture? These people are stone cold killers. Here's a little clip of an interview with an IDF spokesperson. Here we go.
Focus of what we're talking about. Why isn't it that how Hamas has set the stage for this situation by building the infrastructure using civilians, by launching this murderous attack against Israel, and now by telling their civilians not to vacate? That should be front and center of anybody in the world looking at the situation here. Not the fact that we are defending ourselves, and not the fact that we are trying to set the situation straight here and to focus on Hamas and its military capability. I cannot confirm or deny what happened with that specific bus. I've heard the reports, but I can categorically say that we are not targeting civilians. Categorically. If we were, then the situation would be totally different. We are not.
No, sir, and I am not trying to lecture you. I am trying to ask questions. This is a very difficult situation, and I understand your anger after what happened on Saturday. And please do not take any of these questions as an attempt by me to minimize those murders. That is not what I'm doing. But I have spent my day speaking with Canadian citizens 16 years old and 19 years old, and they are stuck in Gaza, and they cannot get out, and they are terrified that they're not going to live through the weekend. 1,700 civilians, people have been killed inside Gaza since your attack started. And I know your intent is to eradicate Hamas, but there has already been significant collateral damage. A journalist crew was killed in Lebanon today. So this is why I ask these questions, not to lecture and not to minimize what has happened to your country.
Listen, I understand that it's your job to ask questions, but I think the choice of questions really has importance here. And I understand that civilians who are there are afraid and concerned. But look, on the other side, we evacuated all of the Israeli citizens in southern Israel. The places are empty. It's ghost towns. All of the communities around the Gaza border, they're empty. Either killed, butchered, or wounded by Hamas, or taken hostage, or actively evacuated by the IDF. And they're all over Israel now, in hotels or with family or wherever they have found a place to be. Why? Because we don't want civilians in an active combat zone. That's also what we've told the Palestinians. It's an active combat zone. Get out.
So what they've done is they said that they're going to be going in. Everybody north of a certain line in Gaza needs to move south. It's 1.1 million people. And now you're going to see propaganda videos. I've been sent them. And on the roads, there were a couple of explosions as people were exiting the Gaza Strip. There's really only two roads that go to the south. There was an explosion. I believe in one explosion, 70 people were killed. And immediately the propaganda is, oh, those were Israeli drone attacks on the people escaping. But there are many pictures. Seth Fransman has posted them at the Jerusalem Post of Hamas blocking the roads with trucks and then disabling the trucks. These appeared to be IED type explosions, not a drone explosion. I went through a couple of them frame by frame. And look, I'm not a computer graphics forensic expert, but I'm just telling you is there were instances where people were filmed in the Gaza Strip. And look, there have been children killed. There have been babies, young children, toddlers killed. That happens when you put your rocket launchers in an apartment building. And it's horrible that it happens. But this is how do you deal with the situation? It's a very difficult thing. It's war. I mean, that's the thing. So there were a picture of Palestinians, and one came running out holding what appeared to be a child, but then when the video stopped, it was clear it was just a large baby doll. But it had blood smeared on it. It was fake. That's what happens. This article, the most horrifying act I have ever witnessed. This is in the Jerusalem Post on today. The people, I saw a video of Anderson Cooper and his film person. They went into a house in a kibbutz, and then you hear the cameraman behind Anderson Cooper vomiting. It took a long time to get through all the bodies. The death count went, when it was 100 on Friday afternoon, so this is 8 or 9 hours after everything had started, it was over 100. Somebody wrote to me that's connected with the Israeli defense establishment or security establishment, said this is going to be 400, now it's 1,300. And the story. So go look for the I-24 news report, and you can listen to what she says. I don't think she said that 40 babies had been beheaded. I don't think that's accurate. But then, as one of my friends in Israel pointed out, who cares if they were beheaded? They killed babies. They targeted and killed babies. And they raped one young girl. So I told you about this girl who was taken out of the thing and her pants were, oh, I think I did. She was brutally raped, and they raped a bunch of other people. It's like the Holocaust. There's all kinds of stories. At Harvard, they signed a letter condemning Israel almost immediately. They put it up. And then what happened at NYU Law School in New York City, they put up a pro-Hamas letter from the head of the Student Bar Association. She had clerked last year for Winston & Strawn, one of these law firms where you're going to make more in some years in your career as a partner than I made in my entire career. You'll make as much in 1 year. Very prestigious. She was going to go into international law. And to their credit, Winston & Strawn have withdrawn the offer. Good for Winston & Strawn. I saw that on LinkedIn today. To the praise of a lot of other lawyers. And now the Harvard students, they found out about that, and they're trying to say, well, we didn't really read the letter before we signed it. And then other organizations like Gatestone Institute and others have published all of their names, and good for Gatestone Institute, because these people need to be called out and know that you can have your opinions, but there are consequences to being evil. This is from the Jerusalem Post Friday. The invasion prompts a renewed examination of Hamas's connections to Iran. This is the Jerusalem Post did a not Jerusalem Post, New York Times I think it was yesterday or Friday, they put up this webpage. It's a timeline. And you can see that in some places it took 20 hours, 13 hours, 8 hours, 8.5 hours for the rescuers to get there. And that's because of the nature of the attack and the nature of that they just weren't prepared for that. They were relying on a lot on technology, and the technology failed. And that ought to be, look what happened where they had what we thought was a secure border. What's going to happen to us where we don't have a border? Yeah. That's the question that people need to be asking. So here is, I don't know if I can get this to come up or not. Hang on. So this is over here. So this shows some of the videos. This is on the New York Times website. Some of the things happening. You see the paragliders coming in. You see you see rockets going off and people flying in. This is at this rave party where they were dancing around a statue of Buddha. More about that in a moment. They saw the rockets coming in. They had security guards. They had a permit to be down there. And they were there to, I guess, to push for peace. There were at least 250 of them killed, probably, and there may still be several hundred missing. Some of them hid, one gal hid in a dumpster, called her parents afraid, and they found her body a day or two later. People got in their cars and ran to their cars. They ran across the field, and the Hamas terrorists just followed after them and mowed them down. They were shooting cars on roads around here, but this may have been where the first real serious attacks occurred. And people called the police, come help us, while they're under rocket attack. And I'm not excusing everything, but there was a place where they went in and killed, my understanding is, near here, 20 police officers in one building. They killed soldiers in bases here. People were putting on uniforms and running to the border, but they're 2 or 3, 4 hour drive away. So it takes a while to get there. But clearly there was a lack of preparedness. Now the question is, how far are we going to go with that? See, here's the Israeli response, sirens sounding in central Israel, but there's nothing about an invasion. People killed in their beds. You can see the terrorists coming into the kibbutzes, and they knew where they were going. They stopped on the roads. They shot people on roads. Here's a terrorist. See what they're doing here? They're shooting people on the roads as they're driving by. And then here's another, I think this video. There are people, they stopped. People tried to get away, and as they ran away, they shot and killed them. So I think there's a link in the show notes for this. You can, and I think it's a free link to get past the paywall at the New York Times. I can't guarantee it, but it's pretty good. These are people that were killed. Here's a guy who was stopped. There's a grandmother who was kidnapped. Prime Minister Netanyahu. And yeah, they didn't get there. Here they're going through cars of people that they killed to get stuff. Computers, money. So here's Israeli soldier response. Here's another one that was killed. There are 1,300 of these stories, and the funerals began today. There was one father found out that the Hamas had killed I think it was an 8-year-old daughter, and he said, I'm thankful to Hashem that she died because I didn't want her to be a hostage. I saw a picture of a funeral this morning, 2 bodies wrapped up, to be buried. A man burying his 2 daughters, who were somewhere around 15 to 20, I believe. So here's a video of the, I don't think there's anything, so I got to get back here to my, I close this down. They used to be able to put live web links in, and they stopped it. So let me close this down. Okay, now I can go back to my web page or my PowerPoint. Here's a video of taken in the area near the rave. You can see what they did with the cars. They blew them up. They shot people. Hundreds of bodies found here. I saw they stacked them in a tent. And what they did was sort of cruel. Here's another video, and you'll see here as the people were exiting, they were only a couple ways out. You can see it's all fields and everything. They shot and killed all the people in cars, so they created a traffic jam. And then everybody behind was essentially a sitting duck. So people survived by driving through the fields, but they went down and shot and killed people in all those cars. People drove down there. One general I was listening to this morning, or lieutenant colonel, he was saying, I couldn't drive because there were so many bodies laying on the road. I had to watch where I was driving. Because there's not, it's agricultural, rural area. There's not that many. Here's a picture of the area of the rave. And of course, the bodies stacked in a refrigerated truck. This is a very good article at Ynet. I have a link in the show notes. And it's from, I'm not going to go in detail about it, but the person who wrote this is, I can't remember his name. There's a link in the show notes. It will be in Hebrew at Ynet. So what you do is you take the link, you copy it, and you go to there's other ways to do this. I think Brave or Google Chrome, you paste the link in the browser, and then in the upper right-hand corner of the address bar, it will allow you, there should be a little drop-down thing appear that says, do you want to translate this to English or another language? But look at this. On the Way to Black Sabbath, a chronicle of strategic intelligence and tactical failure. It's a very good analysis of what happened. It's a sober analysis. Hamas did not intentionally respond to the elimination of jihad officials to portray as the good boy invested in restoring the Gaza Strip. They were deception. They used children, it says here, order violations involving children were used to place charges on the fence. So they sent children to the border that had explosives. They placed them along the fence. They were then able to explode those later and go through. There were at least 4 major, maybe 6 major breaches in the fence. And this is a pretty, everybody thought this is a pretty high-tech, secure fence. Nothing could be, we don't have to worry about it. But go read the article at Ynet. It's pretty stunning. This is an article from Jonathan Spire at the Jerusalem Post. He's talking about, is Iran involved? He did he's with the Middle East Forum, an organization that's run by Daniel Pipes. And here's a little webinar that they did on the internet the other day. And Jonathan has asked, was Iran involved?
Thank you, Greg. And let me start then by considering the Iranian angle, and then I'll go on to look at a couple of other countries and contexts, which I think are useful here. With regard to Iran, it's important a bit of background is needed because the relationship between Hamas and Iran is not simple and needs, I think, to be understood properly in the sense that Hamas does not belong to that group of organizations that we can call simply franchises of the Iranian Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps. That's to say, organizations that Iran created, dominates, has established control of from the beginning. Lebanese Hezbollah belongs to that group. The Iraqi Shia militias belong to that group, but Hamas does not. So I think we need to, first of all, take a quick look at the background to that relationship to understand where we're at here. Hamas' relationship with Iran really begins in the early 1990s when 400 Hamas leaders were expelled to southern Lebanon and established acquaintance with and then friendship and closeness with Lebanese Hezbollah. But it's interesting to note that that relationship, which flourished for the subsequent 2 decades really following that, received a very severe blow just a decade ago because Hamas, reflecting its roots as a Muslim Brotherhood Islamist organization, supported the Islamist uprising, Sunni Islamist uprising in Syria. And as a result, the relationship was very severely damaged. Hamas has been trying over the last now half decade since the civil war.
Well, go read Jonathan's article. And he says, look, part of the problem here is with regard to Iran, Israel's been focused on the nuclear threat. Our own government's assessments came out a couple weeks ago, and it said, well, they're not really actively pursuing a nuclear weapon at this time, but they could have 5 of them in 2 weeks. Well, that's really comforting. And so what is Israel supposed to do? The question is the United States going to try to take out Iran? And boy, now everybody's upset with the United States government. They're making us get involved in wars because that's somebody else over there. It'll never affect us. I think that's rather naive. And I'm not a big fan of war either. This is an article from Seth Frantzman about Israel needs to rethink its regional strategy. Again, there's a link in the show notes to read that at the Jerusalem Post. And I had dinner back in December with Seth and Jonathan Spire. It was a very interesting conversation. We focused more on the north and Syria, though, as I recall in that conversation, not so much on Gaza, because everybody thought, well, we've got that under control. This is what I was talking about. So China's doing all this stuff in the background. So this is in the New York Times today. Chinese Bitcoin mines in U.S. fuel suspicions. Possible security risk and stress on grid. They're Bitcoin mining. They're computer servers. That's how they get the Bitcoin value. They do these calculations, and it costs computers. So here's a server farm in Greenbrier, Arkansas, and they consume a tremendous amount of electricity. Think, guys, and by the way, I don't know what kind of stress that Intel plant that they're building out here in New Albany is going to put on our power and water resources around here because they take a lot of water, they take a lot of electricity, and what they're building out there is only 1/5 of what they really want to build so far. So I don't know. Blinken, he went to Iran. And he's telling everybody they need to back us. This is the Al-Quds newspaper from the Palestinian Authority. Al-Quds meaning Jerusalem. This is the Gaza Strip here on the left. And these are the areas of damage. This is a pretty good graphic from the New York Times that gives you the statistics of what's been damaged thus far and the area of evacuation. Egypt, by the way, which borders the Gaza Strip on the south, has closed the crossing. Hamas, by the way, was going around taking away people's keys to their cars, so they couldn't leave. That shows you the kind of nature of the organization. Vladimir Putin weighed in on this. He gave a speech. He had a meeting of the Commonwealth of Independent States, and then he gave a press conference afterwards. And he was, I'm going to turn the sound down on this. I thought I put the video in here.
Regarding the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, do you think there are prospects of settling this conflict in the next
Now, I want you
weeks
to listen to what
or at
Putin,
least
who's at
months?
war in Ukraine,
And
says.
what is the Russian part is going? What is the Russian part going to do to help this? Well, Israel faced an unprecedented attack that had never happened before, not in scale, but also in character and in remorselessness. We have to face it. Israel is responding on a large scale and using pretty cruel methods, harsh. Of course, we understand the logic of what is going on. But despite all the ferocity on both sides, despite all the remorselessness, we need to think about civilian population. Now we see even in the United States there are evaluations of what's going on.
So he essentially goes on to say, listen,
And there are
we can't let Israel
options
do what
how things
the
might
Germans
go
did to us
from here.
in Stalingrad,
I hear
or Leningrad, which it was called at the time, I believe. But then look at this other headline from the Arab News in Saudi Arabia: non-stop assaults by Russia on key city in Ukraine. And so he's telling Israel to use restraint. Because why? Because it's the Jews, folks. It's okay. What is it that I heard somebody say? If hypocrisy was water, the world would drown. This is a graphic that, and I don't have the tweet teed up, but Alexander Dugin, who has been off and on an advisor to Vladimir Putin, talked about the fact that this is going to lead to a wider war. Here is a meeting that took place in Qatar between the Iranian foreign minister on the left today, Iranian foreign minister on the left, and the leader of Hamas on the right. But they have nothing to do with each other. And our government came out and said, we're not sure Iran's involved. But then in an Iranian newspaper that's a mouthpiece of the Iranian regime, Israel Kayan, they posted, we are the hands, feet, and mind of Hamas in planning this operation. So the thing is, you got to understand is they say one thing to you in the West, and then you go back and see what they say to their people in the original language, and you translate it, and it doesn't come out too well. Caroline Glick, I would highly recommend you go to JNS YouTube channel, JNS, see it up there, Jewish News Syndicate, just JNS, and I put a link, I think, to her YouTube channel in the show notes. She's been doing a lot of videos, very heartfelt, as this is causing a lot of stress in people. I post other videos on my Facebook page of friends of mine, Nicole and some others. This is a very difficult time, but she wrote a very good article at JNS. It was just published. And it says Hamas's deception and our self-deception. And I think she's very accurate in this, that Hamas over the last 2.5 years has sort of convinced the Israeli government, hey, we're trying to govern Gaza. We need some more money. Could you help us? We have a bad water system. Could you help us get pipes so we can put water pipes in? And what do? They're now publishing videos of where they take the pipes to a factory and they turn them into rockets and missiles, the water pipes. But a lot of people in Israel and in the Israeli government believe that the problem could be managed, and that the way to manage it was occasionally we have to mow the lawn in Gaza, as they call it. Well, now they've said they're going in. There are tunnels all over under Gaza City and elsewhere in the Gaza Strip. I think they're going to go in. I don't see any way that they will not at this point after what happened. But it's going to be a very, very difficult battle. So you need to pray for the people involved and pray for the innocent people of Gaza that they somehow be taken out of harm's way. Pray for the innocent people of Gaza. So a long-standing problem. Saudi Arabia put the deal on ice. And now the question is it's going to open in a front in the north? You see the Sea of the Galilee on the right. There's been some rocket fire, mortars, and that type of thing fired on the northern border. I believe, again, these things change. Like the other day, there was a report that there was a massive drone incursion from the north, but it turned out to be, it could have been a cyber attack. It could have been that they were picking up their own drones. But it popped up on the alert. There's a couple of alert apps that you can get if you want to download them. My Red Alert just doesn't work that well. And some of the people are concerned that their Red Alert apps have been hacked. By the way, my personal opinion, remember Israel developed that Pegasus software that they put on the phones of people in other countries and they were able to track people? I will not be surprised if they find out that a lot of the soldiers had that on their phones, and Hamas and Iran have been able to hack into them, and that way, that's how they knew their precise locations. It was, as I said, a very clever operation. Here's an article, analysis, Iran and the second and third front in northern Israel, and that's from Israel Today. By the way, there's a prophecy Facebook page, Be Alert, Prophecy in the News, Be Alert, Prophecy in the News. You can go and follow that and get some of this information. And then there's one other, hang on here. There's an article from Dr. Mordecai Kadar. You see it on the right here, Death Israel, the Iranian plan to attack Israel. So there's a lot of questions about, is this Bible prophecy, this fulfilled Bible prophecy? I don't know that we're ready to have that conversation. I mean, Gaza is mentioned many times in Scripture. Goliath was from Gaza. Samson lost his life in Gaza. Remember, he was unfaithful, lost his sight, and then was able at the end of his life to take out some of the Philistine leadership. And that story itself might be prophetic. So let's just see how this plays out and talk about it. I think it's maybe a little bit too early to make pronouncement that this is that. But listen to the Dr. Kadar's article. He wrote this in April of 2023. I hesitated quite a bit about whether to publish this piece because of the panic it might cause in Israel. However, in the Middle East environment, and particularly in Iraq, these things are known and serve as a topic of open discussion, so it is unthinkable that the Israeli public should not be aware of them as well, especially since they concern Israelis much more than the citizens of Iraq. A source I've known for years, an expatriate from the Middle East, a supporter of Israel who lives in Europe, is in continuous contact with people in Iran and Iraq, conveyed to me their assessment that Iran plans to launch a combined attack on Israel in the foreseeable future that will include all the forces at its disposal in several Arab countries. In Lebanon, Hezbollah and Hamas with many thousands of missiles, some of them precision-guided and unmanned aerial vehicles. In Syria, 17 armed and ready combat units, militias. Iran has transferred a very large number of missiles and UAVs to Syria, and these are ready to be launched. In Iraq, dozens of militias armed with missiles and UAVs. In Yemen, the Houthis, who have Iranian long-range missiles and UAVs capable of reaching Israel, they've launched missiles from Yemen, the Houthis, into the United Arab Emirates, which is about the same distance as Jerusalem. Remember, they made a massive attack on the largest oil refinery in the world a few years ago. In Gaza, he says Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad with missiles capable of disabling the Israeli Defense Forces. It is likely that Iran will not launch anything directly from its own territory so as not to expose itself to retaliation. What follows is my interpretation. Under the pretext of the duty of the Muslim world to save the Al-Aqsa Mosque from the Israeli occupation and oppression. By the way, what's the name of the operation that Hamas is pushing right now? Al-Aqsa Flood. This is a common theme in Islamic jihadi doctrine, that the Jews are trying to destroy Al-Aqsa. In fact, what they said is they've been storming Al-Aqsa. We've talked about this for many months. And over the recent Jewish feast, the holidays celebrated in Israel by religious Jews, about 4,000 Israeli Jews went up on the Temple Mount. They're families. It's a family outing, sort of like a church picnic almost. And they go up there. They're not supposed to pray. You know, who knows what people are thinking in their mind as they're walking around, but they call that storming Al-Aqsa. This is a common theme. Back in 1929, the Waqf, the guy named Haj Aman al-Husseini, some indication that he may have been a relative or an uncle of a guy named Yasser Arafat, was appointed as the person to be in charge of the Waqf, which manages the Temple Mount, now under the control of the Jordanian government. By the way, yesterday they had riots and demonstrations in Jordan, and I don't know how many. To me, it 10,000, 20, 100,000 broke through police lines and started storming the Israel border. But back in 1929, the Waqf started a story. By the way, the Waqf later went to a country called Germany in the 1930s and met with the leader of Germany about the final solution and gave him some ideas. But he started a rumor that the Jews were going to come and destroy the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Now, the Temple Mount area used to be called Haram al-Sharif, and the Waqf's own publication in 1923 and 24 said that this was clearly the site of Solomon's temples. They don't acknowledge that today because it changed as the Jews came back into the land. But he started a rumor that the Jews were going to go destroy the Temple Mount. Jihadi extremists in Hebron went into homes and slaughtered about 80 people, women, children, very similar to what you saw the last few days in southern Israel. So here's what Kedar says. And again, this article is linked in the show notes at jns.org. The first phase, the Arrow one, will be accompanied by a cyber attack on Israeli infrastructure systems. Now, I'm just telling you, he wrote this 6 months ago. Mordecai Kedar is probably the leading Muslim, Islamic, jihadi scholar, person who understands it in Israel today. He is a national treasure in my estimation. After a full day of cyber attack and a rain of missiles and UAVs on military bases and civilian infrastructure, the second phase will begin. This will be a coordinated ground attack from Lebanon, Syria, and Gaza by infantry forces mounted on dirt bikes and ATVs and equipped with anti-tank weapons that will attack Israeli ground forces in order to reach Jewish settlements as quickly as possible. Now, does that sound prophetic? Based on what's happened? 6 months ago, Dr. Kedar wrote this. Now, this was well known in Israel, so I don't know why people didn't. He's a little guy, you know. He's not very big, but he's a giant intellectually. The calculation of the Iranians is that the mobilization of Israel's reserves will take several days and will at best be partial due to the chaos that will ensue from the initial attack. There are people who've driven up through the Jordan Valley and that place, and they see these makeshift parking lots filled with vehicles. What's that? They called up 350,000 reserves. People left home and they had to go park someplace and then be transported to their base. So imagine if everybody drove their own car. I mean, what would 300,000 vehicles do in Columbus, Ohio? I mean, what's it like down around campus when they have what? 25,000 cars for an Ohio State game? The invasion of ground forces from Syria, Lebanon, and Gaza will be focused on Israeli settlements with the aim of demoralizing the Israeli public and forcing the government to surrender in order to save the lives of many Israeli civilians who will be captured by the Arab and Iranian militias. The Israeli media, and especially the social media groups, will increase panic among the Israeli public. This article goes on for quite a while. Please go read it in detail, and I think you will understand what's coming. And so this northern front may open up. I don't know that it will, but now Vladimir Putin is saying, we're going to do this. The IDF came out, though. This is kind of interesting. Also on YNET, also listed in the show notes, the link in Arabic, or I mean in Hebrew. So go translate it, and it says essentially, if Assad joins into this in Syria, we will take out Assad and we will destroy Damascus. Now, there's a lot of controversy in the Bible prophecy community. Is Isaiah 17 that talks about the destruction of Damascus, is that a fulfilled prophecy or unfulfilled prophecy? So you have different camps. You have people say, why are you even talking about this? We should focus on something else. We should be like Andy Stanley. We should focus on affirming transgender children and giving them puberty blockers and sex change surgeries. That's the loving thing to do. Then there are others who say, well, it's already been fulfilled. But what if it's a double fulfillment? That's very often the case. And it says Damascus will cease from being a city. Now, is that a permanent thing? I believe it is. I believe it's yet to be fulfilled. I could be wrong. All I'm saying is this week, the Israeli Defense Forces put out a statement, we will take out Damascus if Assad gets involved. There's also already some indicators that there are Syrian militias moving towards the border in the Golan Heights. So look, this is a very difficult time. Here's a video that was posted. Oh, it's kids out on a it's Youth Day, right? It's like what is this? Oh, here, they're even down swimming, running up the hill, running through the water. What are they doing? They're training for an assault on Al-Aqsa. That's what they're doing. So look, what Hamas did to babies was horrific. In a couple of weeks, what is it, about 3 weeks, we'll have an election here in Ohio where you will get to vote on issue 1. A yes vote means essentially unrestricted abortion in the state of Ohio. So let me ask you this. In God's eyes, what Hamas did is horrible. But how does it really differ from the abortion that we allow to go on in our own country? And what's God going to do to blind us and judge us? That's the question. And the same thing in Israel. They're down there at a rave dancing to a Hindu god. I mean, there's many passages in the Old Testament that say, well, let me go back to Prime Minister Netanyahu's speech at the UN 3 weeks ago Friday. In Deuteronomy, we are given the blessings and the curses. When they came into the land, they went to Shechem, and there put 6 tribes on Mount Gerizim where they shouted the blessings if they obeyed God, and on Mount Ebal, where they have now found almost 100% certain, they have found a couple things. They found Joshua's altar, and there they also found a tablet recently that had the curses. It talked about curses. On Mount Ebal, where 6 tribes were put at the time of Joshua to shout the curses if they failed to follow God's law. And so this is hard to say because I love Israel, I love the Jews, I think this is prophetic what's happening, I'm aware of all the prophecies and that type of thing, but I cannot discount that part of the blindness that happened in this attack may have been spiritual because of what's gone on. But it's always easy to say, well, they need to repent. Yeah, but look at us. What do we need to do? Go read Ezekiel chapter 8 and chapter 9. I've talked about it many, many times. Ezekiel, at the time of the captivity, some people are captive already, goes to the temple, and what are they doing? They're praying to the sun. They're turning their back on the Holy of Holies and praying towards the sun on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, and it's led by the leaders. It sounds like a large portion of the modern evangelical so-called church. Put that in scare quotes. So remember in Corinthians, it says that the things that happened to them in the Old Testament, the nation of Israel, they happened to them for examples for us. And we ought to heed them as well. So we live, I have no doubt about it, in biblical times. I could go on and on. I'll try to update this as I can this week, but I do think we're getting close to the end. But if that's true, how should you live? Anyway, let's pray. Lord, thank you for your word. Thank you for your instruction. Lord, I just pray that you will help us to be kind, loving, firm, strong, and filled with the Holy Spirit as we live our lives in this time, that will be people of truth, love, justice, mercy, but always committed to you and the gospel of Jesus Christ. Bless us this week in Jesus' name. Amen.